Hello, Michael here with another How Do I Render tutorial for Redshift. This week we're going to be looking at how to render a dusty bottle of wine. So you'll see here I've got a model already set up with a wine bottle and a cork which is already textured and materialed. I'm not going to bother going through that because that's pretty straightforward. What we're really fussed with is using one material to apply a couple of different layers to this object and get it to look dusty. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to jump into our Hypershade editor, and then we're going to go to Redshift, and we're going to select, and then we're going to select Redshift Material Blender, which is this one here. And by itself it's pretty uninteresting, but we do want to assign it to our model. So select your model in the scene, right click and hold and assign to viewport selection, and you'll see it does that. Now at the moment it won't look like anything because it doesn't really have a material assigned to it. It's just got the this mixer here essentially. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a base color. So we'll go to base material here on the right in the attributes for that material blender. Click the checker box, go down to Redshift, and we'll just use a Redshift material. So in the Redshift material we're going to call this glass, and it's really important to name these nodes when you're working with the material blender because you're going to end up with a lot of stuff plugged into this a lot of the time, and it'll get very confusing if you haven't named your nodes. So get in the habit of doing that. So we're not going to use diffuse on this. This is going to be the glass layer, so which is why we called it glass. So we're going to turn the weight down for the diffuse channel, and then we're going to go down to refraction, transmission, and we're going to increase that. And then we're going to choose a color. This green color is the one I'm using. It's a hue of 120 and a value of 0.045, and saturation is 1. And then now if we render this, and you'll also see I've got a couple of lights in the scene already, you'll see that we've got a bottle that looks like a bottle of wine essentially, or a bottle without any wine in it because we don't have any liquid inside. And that's fine for now. So the reason why we used a green refraction is because wine bottles are traditionally green, and the glass is a green color, so that's why we're using that. So now we're going to create the label for the bottle. So we're going to jump into Photoshop for that. I've already created a label, but I just want to go over a couple of things before we jump into assigning it here. Okay, so this is my UV layout for the wine bottle. It's not very exciting, so I can turn the UV layout off. I've got it on a separate layer there. And you'll see that I've got the label already created. I'm not going to go through how to create a label because that would be a design tutorial, and this is a rendering tutorial. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to create a bump map based on this. So at the moment you can see the label has already got some texture to it, but I'll create a new one and show you how to make a bump map from that. So we're going to first go to this layer here. I'm just going to use that to create a new layer. So let's create a new layer, and this is going to be called texture. I should be naming all my layers, but I forgot. And then I'm going to select two colors. So I'm going to switch to my brush tool. I'm going to select the color that I've already got, and then on my secondary color I'm going to select a slightly darker one and value. Yeah, that should be fine. And then I'm going to fill this with my front color. Then we're going to go up to filter, and we're going to go to filter gallery, and we're going to use note paper and click OK. And I'm just going to deselect that. So you'll see that's created this note paper effect, which is quite effective, and it creates quite a nice bump map as well. So with this label we're going to assume that the text is embossed, and that the label is bumped beyond the bound of the bottle obviously. So with the darker text, it should appear embossed within this label. So we can now feel free to save this out. You'll see that I had another image here. I'll just move that layer down and delete that old one. So I've got this image here in the center. If I have this on, it will become part of the bump map, and because it's got some high values there, it will actually become embossed and extruded, and I don't want that. I just want it to get the texture from the label underneath. So I'm going to disable that for the bump map, and then I'm going to use Control Shift, and then first I'm going to disable the black background layer. So I've got the alpha channel. Use Control Shift Alt and S, and this is saving for web, but it's good just to quickly get to a PNG. My map size is 2048, just so you know. I'm going to save that out, and I'm going to call this one label bump 1. And then I'm going to re-enable my image in the center. And once again, make sure that you don't have a fill in the background because we want this alpha channel. That's why we're saving this out as a PNG as opposed to JPEG, for instance. So once again, Control Alt Shift and S, save, and save it to wherever you want. I'm saving this inside my project file, which I always recommend. And we're going to select wine bottle UV, and we're going to call this wine bottle UV1, save that, and then we can jump back into Maya. Alright, so back in Maya now, we want to create a layer for our label. So we're going to go into the material blender, we're going to go to material color, select the checker box, go to Redshift and select Redshift material, and you'll get a new material created over there. Then we're going to go into the diffuse channel for this material that we've just created, and before we do that, we're going to name it. This is going to be called label. We're going to go to the diffuse color, go to the checker box, file, open, and select your map. So this was wine bottle UV1. And finally, I'm going to create the bump map for this material. So we're going to go back into the label material. I'm going to scroll down to overall, and we're going to grab bump map, the checker box once again, go to file, select the file node, go to open, and then select your bump map, which is label bump 1 in this case. Now this has got RGB value in it. It doesn't really matter. It's just going to grab the alpha anyway, so that's fine. And as for scale, 0.01 is probably going to be fine for this one. Now we need to make sure that our label is not rendering in the entire over the entire bottle, and I'll show you what happens if you don't have it set. So if I enable the blend color to be 100% blended in, currently you'll see that that happens. So you can see that the bump is working. It's actually sort of embossed itself because it's a lower value than the white background. So we need to create a mask so we don't render any of this white area. So back in the Hypershade editor, we're going to select the material blender, and we want to go to the blend color for color 1, which is our label. So if we just open that up, you'll see you got the RGB, and you want to grab your alpha for your label and plug it into the RGB channel. And normally in a lot of other sort of renderers, this would actually be an alpha channel. I'm not sure why they've decided to make it an RGB, but it works the exact same, so that's fine. So now if we render, you'll see that the only part that's being rendered for that material is the label, and the rest is all that glass. And that bump might be a little bit extreme as well. So let's jump back real quickly, grab the bump map, and let's halve it, so 0.005. Yeah, that's somewhat less extreme. We could also do to go to that channel and also reduce the weight of the reflection and increase the roughness, so it looks like sort of a papery type material. All right, so that's looking pretty good. Now let's create a dust map for this bottle. So we're going to create this using a bake from Maya, and then we're going to use that bake from our UV map and create a dust map in Photoshop. So stick with me because this is a little bit convoluted, but we'll get there in the end. So I'm just going to minimize that for now. Full screen that. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to save. Save, always be saving. And then we're going to do something a little bit weird. We're going to jump back into the Hypershade just momentarily, select our bottle, and we're going to apply the Lambert shader to it, which is a Maya shader. And that's because we're going to switch our renderer to RenderMan Hardware 2.0. So now when we render, we will be getting a Maya render, which is fine for the moment. We just need it on for a second so we can create this map. So we're going to go to create, we're going to create a light, and we're going to create a spotlight. Go to the channel box editor for that one. I'm going to select rotate on the X, -90, move that light up. And then we'll go to the attribute editor for it. We're going to change the color for this to the default red color, which is 360 red, I believe. And the intensity, we're going to see what 1 looks like. Cone angle, 30 is good. Penumbra angle is 10, and drop off, we're going to increase all the way up. And we're just going to do a quick render of this and see what it looks like. All right, so zoom out a little bit so I can get a bit better view. So what I'm trying to create here is a map based on this light. And anywhere that the light is touching is going to receive dust. And the sort of theory of this is that dust falls down and sticks to an object. So the light being above it will create the same sort of effect. We'll also add in some overall dust to our bottle, but this will sort of get us started at the very least and create some areas in which receive slightly more dust because they're facing upwards in the world. So I'm going to hide the cork and just render that one more time just to check. And you also want to try and get some nice gradient. That'll create a much nicer map, and that appears to be doing that fairly well. So I'm just going to roll with that. The value could probably do to be a little bit higher, but it should be fine. So we'll close that render view. We're going to now go to rendering, and then we're going to go to lighting and shading, and we're going to click, before we do that, we're going to duplicate our bottle. So we're going to select the bottle, Control D to duplicate, and deselect. So we'll go to lighting and shading now, transfer maps. All right, so we want to select a source mesh first. So we're going to select our bottle and click add selected under the source mesh dropdown. And then the target mesh is going to be bottle 1, and we're going to add selected. It doesn't really matter which one's which. I just tend to do it in that way so I don't get confused. And then we're going to go down to output maps. I'm going to click shaded, and it's already got one of those. I'm just going to remove that top one. And we're going to change the file format to be a PNG and select an output. So this one's going to rs tutorial /images /sample color. That's fine. You also want to quickly save before you do this because this can sometimes crash Maya. And you can set your map width and height here. It should be whatever your UVs are, but you may need to increase it. I've got mine set to 2048. Once you've set all that, we're going to click bake, and it's going to render it out. And as you can see, it has crashed. Good. All right, second time's the charm. Let's check that one out in Photoshop. Okay, so here's what our baked out map looks like. You'll see that the areas on the UV map that were receiving light have got this red color, and the areas that don't are unfortunately receiving black. The PNG does not seem to function like I thought it did. That's fine though. We can actually do a selection to get rid of it. So we'll just go up to select, we'll go to color range, we'll select the black, and then here you can adjust how much of it is going to actually select. So I think around 130, 140 is fine. Click OK, and then we click delete on the keyboard, and that will delete that. So the reason that we had it set to red was just so it was easily visible. We now want to make this dust map black and white. So just so I can see this a little bit easier, I'll drop another layer in behind it, and I'll just do a fill of white. All right, so that map's there. Control Shift U is desaturate. So now that has all been desaturated, but currently this won't look much like a dust. We need to do some filter to it again. So let's go up to filter. Let's go to noise, and let's select add noise, and then you can just decide how much noise you want to create a sort of dust effect. You can use uniform or Gaussian. I think that I will use Gaussian on this one, and then you can select the percentage. So the more you use, the more it tends to sort of fade away. I think something, maybe let's try 250. Click OK, and that's fine. So our areas that we put dust on, that we put light on, are going to receive dust now. So let's save this out. Once again, Control Alt Shift S, save it as a PNG. This is going to be dust layer 1. Save that. Jump back into Maya. We'll go back into the Hypershade editor. Before we do that, we'll actually reassign our renderer to be Redshift, and then we'll go to our Hypershade editor and make sure that we reassign that material. So this was that. All right, and now we need to create a material for our dust. So let's go to layer 3, and we're going to go to material color once again. We're going to go to Redshift and Redshift material. It's going to create a node somewhere, seemingly random, and we're going to go to weight for this one. So we're just going to drive the color of the dust with the color lobe, We're going to go to weight though, and we're going to select file again, open, and then go to your project file. Because it crashed, it's reset it. And we'll select dust layer 1 and open. We'll also need to assign our alpha to our blend color. You can see that it's not visible currently, so you'll have to expand this out. So select the material blender, tap 3 on your keyboard so you can see all of the inputs. We use our alt alpha and we'll go into blend color 3. So open that up and go alt alpha into that. We're going to reduce the weight of the reflection as well, because it doesn't need to be reflective, and sort of like a middle of the road grey will probably look okay. Before we take a render of that, we're going to delete the old light, and we're actually going to go into the outliner and delete that extra bottle. If you were rendering like I was for a moment there and realizing that everything was a bit funny, that is the reason why. Alright, so that's rendered up. You can see the dust is a little bit on the subtle side. You can see it there on the neck and on the rim. However, I'd like it to be a little bit more obvious, so you can see how much diffuse it is there. And also, I think that this bottle is obviously going to look a little bit better if we've got some overall noise in our map to create a dust effect throughout the entire surface of the bottle. So the first thing that we can do with our dust node is we can assign a remap value node to it, so we can just use that to control how intense the dust is based on that map. So if we go into the Maya drop down there on the left and go to utilities, and we can go down to remap value, and it'll create one of those nodes. So you want to select your alpha output and plug it into the input value, and then the out value into your diffuse weight. And then on the attributes for your remap, you can just go to none, and then you can use this just going up and down to select the value. So if I re-render that, you can see that I can adjust that real time with that node, which can make it just slightly easier than going in and changing the color and fiddling around. So that's all well and good. It kind of looks dusty, but I think we can do some more. You can see that it's not affecting the reflection. We'll fix that in a moment, but let's create some overall dust for our bottle before we do that. So back in Photoshop here, we want to go to our background layer now, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to go to Filter, Noise, Add Noise. And however much noise you want, I'm going to use the same settings. And then I'm just going to change the opacity till I get it to the point where, well, actually what I want to do here, you can see that the areas where I created the map are darker than the areas in the background. So I can select the top layer, hit Control E, they'll merge them, and then I can actually invert this by going to Image Adjustments and Invert. So now these lighter areas will be more dusty and these darker areas will appear less dusty. And let's save this out using the same method as a PNG. Save, and we'll call this dust layer INV, so that's dust layer inverted, and replace. We'll jump back into the Hypershade editor. We'll go to our dust layer and we'll change that map to be the dust layer INV. And now when we render it, you'll see that it's a lot dustier. So this is where the remap value node comes in handy. So we can just quickly jump in there, turn that down to get it to where you want it to be, depending on how subtle you want it. I'll probably keep this a little bit less subtle than I would normally, just so you can see it easily in the video. However, we need to fix the reflections now. So what we want to do is we want to drive the reflection weight with the dust layer alpha. So we're just going to run the alpha out into reflection weight on our glass shader. So now when we run that IPR again, areas, I'll have to zoom in, areas where there are dust will ignore reflection, as you can see, which will just make it a little bit more realistic looking, especially at a distance. And further to that, we can create a bump map for our dust. So let's go into the dust material. Let's actually name it like smart people. We'll go into the attributes for that, scroll down to overall, go to bump map, create a bump map by selecting Redshift and typing in bump, and use Redshift bump map. Connect your out color to the input, and 0.01 should be fine. And now you can see that we're actually getting some apparent displacement of our dust, which looks good when you're sort of at about this sort of medium shot. Now I'm just going to fiddle momentarily with the areas that had that initial bake assigned to them, so I can get those areas which are facing upwards on the model to look a little bit more apparent, and I'll show you what that render looks like. Alright, so I went back into that initial bake and I just increased the values of it, so now the areas that were baked out are a lot more highlighted than the overall dust. So now when we render that, you can see that the areas that are facing up, which had that initial map assigned to them, the initial bake out, are a little bit more opaque than the areas that did not. And I could do to fiddle with this a bit better, I think. I think the dust is probably a little bit too dense, and obviously right now it's way too intense. I could go back into my remap value and just reduce that and get it to be a little bit more subtle. But the good thing about using this layer technique is that you will have the dust over the entire model, including the label, so it will appear a little bit more realistic. And assigning a bump map to it just makes it look a little bit better again. And finally, for this sort of thing, I would normally light link. So I've only got one key light, and my rim light I would just use light linked to the bottle and not to the plane. So I'll show you how to do that real quick. So I'm just going to go, which light was that? Light 2. So we'll go into Windows, Relationship Editors, Light Linking, Object Centric. We're going to select the plane. We're going to deselect Physical Light 2. That's going to be my rim light. And now when I render this, you'll get a nice cast shadow that way. And then you can use the secondary light to just illuminate the overall silhouette of the bottle, so you can bring it back a little bit. Probably turn off visibility as well. And that's just so you break the overall silhouette of the bottle, so you can actually see the edge of it and get the overall impression of what it looks like. And also, if you increase the transparency on the shadow of that secondary light, you'll get a little bit more refraction through that bottle, which could be useful. So that's pretty much it. You can now go ahead and design your own fancy bottle of wine or whatever beverage suits your taste. Hopefully you liked this tutorial. Hopefully it gave you a good overview of the Material Blender, which is a very powerful tool for Redshift. And you can use it for all sorts of things that require decals or labels, or you could use it for architecture and all sorts of things. It's really great. I recommend diving deep into it and using it in as many things as possible. It makes iterating on models a lot quicker. If you liked this tutorial, however, make sure you click the like button so other people can find it. And if you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed, as I'm putting out a couple of tutorials every week for all sorts of CG products, just like Redshift. Also, make sure you're following on Facebook to stay up to date. Link in the description for that. That's it for now though. Thank you very much for watching, and happy rendering.